Approaching the shore. It was about 10 years ago, or a little more than that, since I'm 22. My family moved to Thailand from South Korea when I was 11, and the decision was made in 2 weeks. We were meant to live there only for a year, but it turned out that we fully left that place when I graduated my year 13. That is the equivalent of sixth form in Britain or high school in America. It felt as if I was thrown into the sea without knowing how to swim. More often than not, it was unbearable, and never for a single moment I missed those days with a genuine heart. Although the decision to move was made in haste, and I did not know what life in Thailand would be like, I was happy to leave. I hated my country, the teachers, my primary school, the classmates, my pathetic life in South Korea. The education system's fucked up. I think every South Korean will agree with me on this. Also, there was so much drama among the classmates, and at the end I had a fight with a boy which got pretty large and messy. So leaving that country was in a way a relief and comfort, knowing that I could avoid them all. My parents sent me and my brother to an English-speaking international school in Thailand. There weren't many options. If you are a foreigner and not a permanent resident in Thailand, you are expected to go to an international school. I was excited at first, not just because my experience of the school back home was awful, but the thought of seeing different cultures colliding into one another. How would they resolve historical traumas? And how would the descendants of the former colony interact with that of a former colonizer? Despite all the anticipation, there was a problem. I could not speak English. I knew some words, and I could say the basic phrases, but that was about it. Little did I know that would be so much of an offense to be accepted as a friend. Racism, though one word, has different dynamics in each place. In my old school, the better English you spoke, the more value you had as a human being. The better you knew about European culture, the more civilized you were. The more financially richer your home country was, the more you were respected. Otherwise, there was not a chance. If you did not fall into these categories, you deserved to be bullied, ignored, unheard, and accused of wrongdoings, just to name a few. Most of all, they treated me as if I was mentally disabled and could not do anything other than to sit and dream off. Nobody bothered to ask me anything in a group task. I was invisible, or was only visible when they wanted to make a fool out of me. This did not happen just to me, but to all those who were not fortunate enough to be desirable. Unfortunately, I did not know any of this school culture, so it was really shocking to realize it was very far from whatever I envisioned in my mind. Teachers. Some teachers were amazing, and they gave me the respect nobody gave me, but the number was few. Also, a lot of them were white British, and most of them were not aware of so many ways they could hurt someone for their lack of cultural awareness. I was only an 11-year-old, and my identity and the way I saw myself was very malleable. I was not emotionally mature to cope with and reject the ways the majority saw me. It all absorbed into myself, and I saw myself through their eyes. I am incapable, nobody wants me, and nobody likes me. I am always wrong, and I am not lovable, let alone deserve to be heard. Unworthy is my identity, and I look hideous. As a young teenager, and having never left that school before coming to university, I did not know this was racism. It was only when I came to university that I realized there was something wrong in the way people thought of English and how they treated me. I miss my dog Ipany. The snowy winter back home. I used to be able to make a snowball in the perfect shape of a sphere using my bare hands without feeling cold. I miss the dark grey pavement of South Korea, the Bodobulok for pedestrians, the traffic, Seoul metro trains, the road signs, the mountain near home, 여의도 공원, 울창한 나뭇잎, 청량한 여름. The mundane supermarket my mom used to send me for 심부름. To be able to speak without the fear of making grammar mistakes, to feel like I belong to a place without needing to even think about my sense of belonging, to never worry about linguistic barriers. So much of my identity and everything that once was normal was taken away, and they now belong to a distant past. I don't know the word to describe what learning English feels like. It's ridiculously hard. Learning any language is like hiking up Himalaya. Beyond the grammar structure and vocabulary lies the demand to understand the culture and history of the language. Each word carries centuries of history and different connotations. Even if the word is simple and seemingly translatable from one language to another, it will never carry the same temperature because of its historical baggage. Sometimes the word would change its meaning throughout time as well. For example, the word gay used to mean carefree and light-hearted, but it now refers to a homosexual man. It was understanding these nuances of each word that came as one of the largest challenges for me. In fact, I am still learning without an end. As if this was not enough, the speaking side of English and learning to speak spontaneously has been a whole different story. It took years, and I still struggle with speaking, hence why I would rather write than speak. One of the indicators to tell if someone is really eloquent in a language is to see if they can have a really heated and angry argument in another language. If it was only getting excluded from the majority of the people, it might have not been that bad. But to sit in each class from 8:30 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon for 5 days a week without understanding a single thing, and to repeat this for months and years, each day was scary and damaging, and I felt small. But what little is there to do other than to keep sewing each day and accept this sense of feeling stupid as my new normal? For each exam I sat, I could not understand the majority of the content, and I barely got any more than 10% right. Others got at least 60%, and they seemed to be doing so well. They had friends they could comfortably talk to in English, they understood jokes in English, they could do speeches in front of the school, and talk to teachers without shying away or feeling self-conscious. For obvious reasons, the first few years felt suicidal, as if I was stuck in a long tunnel without anyone or without any light. Constant rejection, feeling inadequate, shame of being different, shame of being a South Korean, shame that I could not speak English very well, shame that I am treated in the way I did. Each day I went to school knowing it would be another day of humiliation and ignorance. One incident comes to my mind as I write this. It was not racism, but I just felt really excluded. My school had a cross-year activity class every week or something, and it happened in that session. Still to this day, I have no clue what was going on. But it was so noisy with so many students from different year groups gathered in one large room. The teachers told us to group into 10 and sit in a circle for reasons I could not understand. There was a girl I used to eat lunch at the same table, so I just followed her along. She didn't like me, since I didn't hold much value in my school back then, and it was obvious she was pretending to not know me. I saw it coming, so I tried not to let it get to me. When we sat down, the students started talking about something, and in the middle they laughed. I laughed along. Fuck knew what they were talking about, but I still laughed along to deny that I could not understand a thing of what they were saying. After a while, the teachers told us that we had to play a game together, whatever the point of it all was. Of course, I could not understand the rules, and it took me a while to figure them out by looking at what others were doing. It was my turn to respond, but I was yet to figure out the rules, so I just sat there like an idiot, not knowing what to do. Some people saw me as a downer for stopping the flow of the game. I mean, I saw it coming. Also, I understand their disappointment. But if I could go back, I want to punch them all in the face, kick everyone out of that room, and just have a moment of silence and grief. I don't think what they have done was particularly awful. These incidents happen in school, and that's what school's like for a lot of people. Also, I don't think they deserve my punch and getting kicked out for no apparent reason. But I just wanted to metaphorically say how much anger it accumulated in me for the way things were, and for how small and powerless I felt. God knows what it was for, but my Year 7 tutor group were playing a game together, and of course I could not understand the rule. There was a South Korean boy in the class, so the tutor asked him if he could translate it for me. He must have suffered a lot from the school culture too, but, my lord, he was rude as fuck. He did not explain anything, but just said in Korean, "You see what's written on the board? We're all doing it together, so you need to participate too." He really did not seem like he wanted to use Korean at all, and must have thought his Koreanness was the stain he had to bleach away. The rest of the class assumed he translated it correctly. When it came to my turn, I obviously could not do anything but look blank. He rolled his eyes and shook his head like I'm worth nothing. The teacher looked at him and he said he explained everything, but apparently I was too thick in the head to even understand my own language. I can't remember what happened after that, but for the rest of the game I probably did not join in, but just sat at my desk at the back of the classroom doing nothing. Similarly, this was in physics class. The teacher knew I was not good at English, and he did not quite like me as a student either. So he one time intentionally picked up on my English to humiliate me in front of the class. The word bias was something we had to consider in carrying out the experiment that day. He asked me in front of the class if I knew the meaning of this word. I said I don't. To that he replied, "If that's the case, look it up and learn it." Of course he did not bother explaining the meaning of the word at the end. But how would I look up the word during the class? Does he expect me to carry that heavy-ass Oxford dictionary everywhere, or ask the students around me where most of them saw me as a burden? The discrimination was often subtle like this. The teacher could easily deny what he was doing by claiming that he meant it for good, and I'm just paranoid. Or that it was because he used to work in the army, so his way of communicating is tough at times. Well, fuck you. Does he know what it feels like to learn a whole new language and study everything in that language as an early teenager, find friends in the year group of barely 50 people, absorb the daily dose of humiliation from my goddamn English, feel awfully homesick, and adjust to the country that does not even speak the same language as the school or my home country? He should have been grateful I was not having a panic attack in the middle of the class, instead of shaming me for not knowing what the word bias meant. But this does not mean all the teachers were like him. There were some really amazing teachers who treated me as another person, not another Asian person. When I'm with these kind of people, I see them and myself beyond our skin colors. They let me communicate with them as another human being despite the differences. I'm trying to think of what it was like to be in that school after 4 or 5 years. For some reason, not that many incidents come to my mind. I think it was a combination of embarrassment and slowly recovering my dignity. My ability to respond in English started to improve slowly. Each time I spoke something new or wrote something in a new way and got it right, I felt euphoric and radiant. But I really cannot recall a specific example. My then art teacher approved of me a lot, which was beyond meaningful. Word spread around the year group that my art was cool or something. All these encouraged people to start seeing me as someone other than the girl who's bad at English. It was only by the last 2 years in that school that my language stopped affecting my grades so much. Who would have thought I would improve this much? I genuinely don't think anyone, including myself, expected this much out of me. Instead of getting less than 10% right in every exam for years, apart from maths, I could actually perform as close as if I was taught in my native language. My essays received full marks every now and then, and one time the teacher asked me to be the translator for one of the parents' evenings. People slowly started to treat me with a little more respect. Most of them stopped ignoring me and acknowledged that I, for once, existed. Some students started asking me how much I got for exams, not to shame me, but to admire how well I did. In year 12, I became part of the student council or committee and attended all the useless meetings. Although the silent plague of racism in the school never disappeared, I was more or less saved from the discrimination. It was a massive relief to know that I was no longer invisible or considered as someone with a malfunctioning brain. Nevertheless, my motivation to study or engage in school activities was not so much about learning something that intrigued me. It was so that my achievements could be my defense, so nobody would look down on me or treat me like they once did. But this could not help me from feeling like a failure. Although people did approve of me, I could not cut away my old identity in the school. The fear of failing and rejection eventually culminated into anxiety that consumed me for hours each day. I remember sitting in my room alone, not knowing what to do other than frantically pulling out my hair. Despite all the drama, I did graduate from that school, but ever since then, I never went back to that place. Some of the alumni of the year group proudly show on their social media profile that they lived in Thailand and went to that school, but I never do. Why would I? Only to be reminded of the humiliation and shame, and the school that just surrendered to racism as if that was the absolute truth. When I came to university in England, I noticed that most people never for once considered the ability to speak English as a requirement to be a human. Although racism still exists, and I face it every now and then, nothing is as haunting as what I experienced in my previous school. Each racist incident is awful, but none of that harassment really compares to the years of racism I had to deal with when I first stepped into the Europeans' world. Being in an art university, people seem to be more alert about issues related to discrimination, and a lot of them treated me as another person. But I cannot speak for every ethnic minority student in the university. On the other hand, this never means it does not hurt any less. One of my friends, Lucy, once said that what hurts us in the past still hurts us just as much, but we're better at dealing with it. Each racist incident scratches my emotional ties connected all the way to my early years in Thailand. But in a wider scope, the feelings from Thailand are tangled to my childhood in South Korea as well. So when I was not as recovered from those experiences as I am now, each racial attack, however small or large, was extremely painful and infuriating. They were bringing back to life the feelings from Thailand I dread to encounter. It's almost like an allergic reaction. The stimuli might not be that horrible, but it shakes up something so much deeper inside my heart. But over time, meeting one beautiful heart after another, I'm slowly abandoning the racist views to see myself and others as who they really are. 2 years after I graduated from that school, I threw away or donated nearly everything from there. All the yearbooks, most of the pictures taken during that time, the school uniform, the backpack I used, and the diaries I wrote agonizing about my school life. When all that shit was gone, I felt like a massive burden got lifted off my shoulders. Most of all, removing all the crap helped me stop seeing my then present self through the lens of the past. I was once bullied for who I was, but that does not make me any less of a human. But nothing is as neat as black and white, and it is something I constantly have to remind myself. I still see myself through the past experiences, and it is painful. It does not help knowing that there will always be people who will racially assume me and reject me for who I am, stopping me from doing what I want to do or need to do. Despite everything, I am slowly growing to protect my heart and learn my value. It would have not been possible to have come this far without the people I met. There are so many people, too many to count, who have been helping me walk out of the shame. The friends who never saw me through stereotypes, the strangers on the street who smiled at me, the neighbors who considered me as someone living next door, not the Chinese living next door, and so many more. Most of all, compliments on my English never seem to get old. I often forget how far I have come in this language. It's a terrible habit I developed after so many years of hearing people criticize my English. But I do want to show my gratitude to people who helped me the most in recovering from my previous school. Lucy, you came to my home in South Korea and stayed there for 3 weeks. The way you appreciated my culture and how you were so keen on visiting museums to learn about the history of Korea was so meaningful. Before then, I did not know by heart that my culture could truly be interesting to someone and was worthy of their time and attention. It felt as if the way I saw my culture got trampled on the ground by so many people, but you picked it up and restored it. Not only this, but also you started learning Korean to read the letters on the buildings and signs and asked me if you were reading the letters correctly. Perhaps you thought you were bothering me, but each question felt like a flower laid on a memorial site. Celeste, you love Korean food, and we make them together for dinners every now and then. I would have never cooked them myself, partially because of the shame, and partially because of the amount of effort it takes. The very last comment I want to hear whilst eating Korean food is, "Oh, what are you eating? Do you even eat that?" But you love them so much, sometimes more than me. The smell of Korean food from the kitchen, seeping into my room, reminds me of home, and a sense of safety arises in my heart. Although you did not necessarily mean it this way, I feel personally appreciated when you love them so much. Kalika, I don't even know where to start with you. Every amazing photograph of South Korea I find on Instagram, I send them to you because you call them magical. Depending on where we stand, my country can be mediocre or just as immaculate. Every time you say Korean language sounds so cute, I cannot be happier. It was so natural for me to think they sounded hideous and peculiar, something to hide and not to be proud of. How you love Korean music and TV shows comes as a surprise to me each time, since they often are a subject of mockery. Timna, you told me you really wanted to meet a South Korean in real life because you found the culture so fascinating. It's a tiny country with all the tug neighbors, so we don't often get media attention, or at least it used to be. Despite all, he still discovered a ton about my culture, which is beyond impressive. I'm so grateful to know you. You came like a fairy who wanted to tell me our cultures are equal. It still impresses me how you've been to South Korea before with your friends, and you learned Korean at university out of your own will. This was unimaginable in my previous school for a European to do this. All you did was being interested in Korean culture, so you traveled there and had a good time. But how you enjoyed and appreciated it is so much more precious than you realize. When you speak Korean, it does not literally mean Nis is speaking Korean, but it personally speaks to me as Nis is appreciating where I come from, and therefore she is valuing who I am as a person too. Abby, you always make it so comfortable for me to be around you. You don't seem to realize, but you have this natural talent in being considerate of other people's feelings. You never ask awkward questions nor make assumptions about me not having grown up in Britain. Some people in the past used to keep commenting about my Asianness. They did it to get to know me better, but I found it uncomfortable because their questions were based on so many flawed assumptions. Your non-judgmental and laid-back attitude allows me to be less self-conscious to talk about my cultural background if it ever needs to come up in a conversation. 서로의 가장 오래된 친구 혜연아. 1년 만에 만나도 2년 만에 만나도 어제 본 것처럼 너와 스스럼 없이 지낼 수 있다는 사실에 난 정말 축복받았다고 생각해. 나는 우리 집보다 너희 집이 더 좋아. 비록 같은 평수, 같은 아파트에 살지만 너희 집에서는 좋은 추억밖에 없어서 그런가 봐. 왠지 모르게 우리 부모님 집이랑 너희 부모님 집은 지난 17년간 그래왔던 것처럼 이사하지 않고 영원히 그렇게 우리 집은 그 아파트 7층에 너희 집은 같은 아파트 9층에 있을 것만 같아. 팬케이크 만들겠다고 설치다가 반죽 용암석처럼 태웠던 날. 같이 너희 방이나 내 방에서 공부했던 날. 17살 때 서울에 놀러가서 지하철 타고 새벽 1시에 집에 왔던 날. 초등학교 1학년 때 같이 집에 올 때도 손잡고 집에 왔는데 우연히 뒤에 계시던 우리가 알던 분이 뭘 그렇게 손도 꼭 잡고 집에 가? 라고 장난스럽게 물으셨던 거. 넌 기억나? 아마 못하겠지. 그렇지만 무엇보다도 너는 나를 절대 질투하거나 나랑 너를 비교하지 않아. 나한테 자랑도 하지 않아. 그래서 너랑 있으면 편해. 지금까지 날 존중해줘서, 기억해줘서, 널 만나서 참 행운이었어. Yui, thank you for writing me the Christmas letter last year, which became the seed of this collaborative project. It is hard to describe what it feels like to be catching up with you every now and then. It is different from catching up with people I met in university or in South Korea. But I somewhat feel like a part of my homesickness is resolved every time we talk. It's strange because we weren't even friends when we were in Thailand, and we're not from a nearby place in South Korea either. But we should talk about our old school every time we meet, and I love it. I love the fact that I can talk about the school to someone without explaining everything because you can understand. Perhaps it is because nobody at home or here really understands our school dynamic, and each international school has a different culture. We did International Baccalaureate, or IB, which is so niche even for a lot of international schools, since most of them did A-level or something American. So when I meet people who did IB, I feel as if I met someone from home. For these reasons, talking to you feels like I'm somewhat at home, although I'm really not. I think it's deeply associated with the sense of healing from our old school. Most of all, I'm grateful for myself for surviving that time and who I have become over the past years. I'm glad I have not lost my ability to speak Korean and enjoy reading in my first language. Now I can speak 2 languages, which allows me to learn about so many different views on everything. It helped me evaluate different approaches to the ways of living. but also I love how I can appreciate my culture more freely. As soon as I land at the Beige airport in Seoul, I just want to lay down in the corridor like a drunk person and have a nap before going to the immigration. It's that much of a relief to be somewhere where I will never stand out culturally or racially. Every time I go back to South Korea, I cycle along the river in Seoul, visit Kyobo bookstore and their stationery store, as well as the hospital for my eyes. Checking out what has changed in the supermarkets and the library in my hometown is also on my to-do list. My trip is never complete without hanging out at my oldest friend's flat, once again breathing in the distinctive cozy smell of her home. These almost became my ritual to carry out for each of my trips to go home. It took me years of rethinking of myself and my country to muster up the courage to appreciate them all. This, however, does not mean that I am completely free from the influence of racism. In fact, this is only the very beginning of the healing process. My fear of racism affects every aspect of my everyday life, influencing what I eat, where I go, what I do, who I see, and what I say. But each moment I have a choice to decide how to respond and what to take in to build my identity upon. Slowly but surely, I am growing stronger to recognize and reject the influence of racism in my life. Easier said than done, but I hope one day I can be fully at peace with where I come from and who I am. I was lonely as fuck in Thailand, despite having gone to a rich school and lived in a beautiful country. The bright sunlight in Thailand shined like nowhere else. The phosphorescent turquoise sea was always just about cold to swim in. The illuminated restaurants at night by the beach in the summer heat. They were all truly beautiful, but I was in too much distress to appreciate them all. Although Leeds is cold and wet, and the winter is brutal, I'm happier here than I have ever been in my goddamn life. This was possible because of the people I met and the priceless friendships I was fortunate to be in. Meanwhile, I'm soon to receive counseling for my severe anxiety, and I look forward to approaching it with professional help. The story I delivered is only one side of my past years, and there's a lot more to it. Also, how I talk about it will change throughout the years to come, so I cannot solely blame it on my previous school. But if I can be sure of one thing, it is that my experience at the school was really damaging to my mental health. It's scary that I need counseling and medication to recover from those years. It's even scarier that my story is not unique, and a lot of ethnic minorities in any country live with such a burden or worse. Racism will not go away, at least in my lifetime. Also, I probably will unintentionally hurt someone racially out of ignorance and insensitivity, if not out of my own insecurity. It's so daunting to accept that it is a lifelong battle nobody asked for. As overwhelming as that sounds, I also have hope that I will grow to not let it cage me, but live in freedom. Looking forward to the future, I want to invest in relationships a lot more than ever. Not necessarily romantic relationships, but relationships with friends and family, because I learned myself through them in love. For me at least, my identity is built upon how I'm related to people around me. I require a vow to become. Whatever I do, wherever I live, my hope is to pass on the amazing gift of friendship and share the love I discovered in Leeds to whoever I meet next.